episode 23. Boxing's biggest names, boxing's biggest stories, and of course, boxing's biggest fights. And we had a big one over the weekend as Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin completed their 36 rounds, their trilogy. And we have so much to talk about that fight. The fight itself, the ramifications from Canelo winning the unanimous decision, the decision itself, not that there was any controversy as to who won, but the judging in it. Where do these fighters go from here? Where do they rank in terms of the history of the great middleweights? And I think we'll keep it at middleweights, even though it was at, super middleweight. And both of these guys, or especially Canelo, has gone all over the place in weight. We'll keep it at that. So much of our conversation will be about what took place Saturday at T-Mobile. But in addition to that, we have some significant previews to do of what's going to take place today, especially a big heavyweight encounter. And also, it's been hot in Vegas. But the boxing season, the rest of the way, is hot, filled with a plethora of extremely interesting, intriguing, exciting, and A-list matchups in the sweet science, the final quarter of 2022. So a lot on the plate here, and let's dish it right up to, you know him, you love him, the man from friendly West Virginia, who in 1922 scored his first knock. No, he didn't do that. But he is a boxing historian. He is a boxing writer. He is a boxing author. He is a CompuBox counter. And he is Lee Groves. How you doing, Lee?
Doing well, Smitty. And you're right. We have a lot to talk about. And the first fight that we're going to talk about is actually the co-feature to Triple G and Canelo. And that was when Jesse Bam Rodriguez, youngest champion in the sport that holds a widely recognized title. He defended his WBC super flyweight title against Israel Gonzalez. And when I was conducting research for this fight, I counted his bout with Jose Martinez Mercado, which was in March 2021, and I saw his numbers for his three previous title shots against Jerwin Ancajas, Khalid Yafai, and Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez, all three very good fighters. And based on what I saw, I knew he had the game to at least challenge Bam Rodriguez. And unlike Quadras and Sor Rungvisai, the 25-year-old Gonzalez was not a shop-worn fighter who was past his peak. He was young, he was taller, he had the longer reach, he had strong work rate. And he showed all of these things in the first half of the fight. And it made it very interesting. And after 4 rounds, I actually had Gonzalez up 3-1. But starting in round 5, however, Rodriguez started to show why he is considered the front runner for Fighter of the Year. He closed the gap ever so slightly so he can get in range to land his shots. And when he landed those shots, they were heavier and they were more accurate. His body attack also slowed Gonzalez just enough for Bam to continue his momentum, wear him down a little bit. And really, the only point of imperfection from Bam was that he rightly lost 1 point for low blows in round 8, and he probably should have got a second one in round 11. Gonzalez was valiant from start to finish, and he ended up losing not because he was a bad fighter, but because Bam was really good. He was better. That said, Bam wasn't quite as spectacular against Gonzalez as he was against Quadras or Sor Rungvisai. And because of that, I get the sense that the bar for him is starting to settle a little bit. Is he a pound for pounder? He's getting there. Is he still the front runner for Fighter of the Year? Definitely he is. But is he an invincible juggernaut? Nobody is, but he's still a star in the making. Remember this, he's still 22 years old. He's the youngest widely recognized world champion, and he's years away from his prime. I still like what I see from him very, very much.
Yeah, me too. I feel the same way. You did a great job last week of kind of breaking this one down, and it was a good competitive fight. Now the talk is going to be because I know Bam was talking about fighting one more time in
Yeah.
2022. That was a pretty rough fight, and I think it might behoove him just to take the rest of the year off, let those other guys who he's in line to fight or fight again deal with their business, and just start fresh in 2023, and probably start fresh as 2022's fighter of the year.
Agreed. It was a hard physical fight. He took more shots against Gonzalez than he did in either the Quadras fight or the Sorungvisai fight. Went 12 full rounds. It was a physically demanding fight. Yeah, he's 22 years old. If he wants to fight in December and if he feels up to it, he has the perfect right to do it. But really, the next logical contender, or the next logical fight for him to go, is the winner of the Juan Francisco Estrada Chocolatito fight, which we're going to mention later on in the show. So that would join 3 of the belts, and then his older brother Joshua Franco holds the other belt. So that's going to present a bit of an issue as well. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that Bam would be well advised to take a rest. He had a good and demanding year. It'll probably get him fighter of the year. And just sit back, rest, recuperate, and see how the landscape unfolds over the next few months.
And on those knockdowns, I wish that everybody, especially Vegas, with the modern technology, I mean, I don't know why they can't, if there's a mistake with the referee seeing something, sometimes the referees aren't in position, many times, to see whether a blow was to the belt line or above the belt line or below the belt line. They can go back, and it wouldn't take but 20 seconds or less to determine whether. I just wish they would do that, because there probably should have been a second point deducted from Bam.
Well, not only that, earlier on the card, Kieran Conway, I think he got a knockdown in the 9th round, and his corner was complaining that was not a knockdown, and the referee told them, it's under review. We will tell you one way or the other what the deal was. And even before the rest period was over, the referee went over to the British corner and said, yep, they reviewed it. It's a knockdown. It sticks, and they seem to accept that. So when the second low blow happened, the referee did not issue a count. If he thought it was a fair blow to the stomach, he should have started administering a knockdown count. He didn't do that. And apparently, based on what we've seen, he didn't go to the review to see if it was a low blow or not. So he kind of messed up on 2 accounts.
Yeah, Kenny Bayless, the referee, may have, it looks like on that one, there was a little bit of a mix-up. And the way to correct that mix-up, it's all, they just should start even practicing doing that in between rounds, go to a gym and figure out ways to practice this stuff, because with boxing and scoring being so subjective, and 1 point, 2 point can make the difference in a guy, and not only a fight, but in some ways, a guy's career. I think it's really important that they do that. They have the technology for it. Boxing doesn't have many tools. One tool they have, and you're a big part of it, is CompuBox, as a way to count and figure things out and determine things. But with, as far as low blows and headbutts and illegal punches and things of that nature, really taking 15 or 20 seconds, and even if it's a minute, to get it right is so important. They do it ad nauseum in football. So I think it should be something, and hopefully they'll start to do that, which brings us to the main event. Round number 25 through 36. Triple G and Canelo Alvarez going into the fight. My prediction was very simple. He's old. Triple G's old. He'll lose, and he might get stopped. And the only thing I wasn't sure of was how much has the redhead diminished. So before I go into my whole dialogue and diatribes about it, talk about the fight itself. G and Canelo, the trilogy.
Last week you said that Triple G was old and rigid. That rigid was a word that you used several times, and right to be taken out in the later rounds. Abel Sanchez thought that it might be a dodgy stoppage in the later rounds, and You said that he may be at age 40 too far gone, and that the fight wouldn't be competitive. Now, I said that the fight would be more competitive than than people thought it would be, and it turns out in some ways both of us were right, because for the first 8 rounds, Canelo pitched a shutout. He was scoring more. He was more accurate. He was winning the rounds. And then in round 9, Golovkin somehow unlocked himself. Canelo went down a peg, and in my eyes, they split the final 4 rounds 2-2. And in the end, Canelo won a unanimous decision, but by scores that were, we think, far more narrow than it should have been. Dave Moretti scored the fight 116-112, while Steve Weisfeld and David Sutherland turned in 115-113 scorecards. Now, my scorecard read 118-110 for Canelo, and yours was similar to mine, right?
Mine was 117-112. After 8 rounds, I had the redhead up 80-72.
Yeah.
And the last 4 rounds, I had 3 of them. Well, so I had 2 of them for Gennady, 1 of them even. And no, I'm looking at it now. I had 1 even and 3 for Gennady Golovkin. So yes, he really closed very strongly, and it made me look up what a bad fuel pump is. In an automobile, a bad fuel pump may overheat and inadequately deliver gas to the engine, causing it to run hot or turn off while on the road. And I'm equating the bad fuel pump to the redhead, Canelo Alvarez. I had already mentioned before on this show that I thought that, Canelo has stamina issues. We've talked about it, but he clearly, now we've seen it in 2 straight fights, he has a significant decline down the stretch in terms of his, I don't have the punches in front of me, but the velocity on the shots, what he does, he just seems like he gets fatigued and becomes phlegmatic. And I've seen it now in 2 straight fights, and it led to the fight being, as you said, it might be, closer than I thought it would be. In fact, I thought it had we not seen all of that in Canelo, I think that Canelo was on his way to maybe getting a complete blowout or a stoppage. But down the stretch, you're right, Gennady came on, but I think it was more about Canelo, basically evaporating and not having anything left. In fact, even the last round, Lee, I gave, the last round to Triple G as well.
Yeah, I pointed out last week that one of the reasons I thought it would be more competitive was because Triple G averaged 29 more total punches thrown per round than Canelo did in the fights that happened between fights 2 and 3, 66-37. And that if he was going to win, he's going to have to do something similar. But in fact, just before the fight, I tweeted out the following: Would Triple D dare to jump on Canelo in the early rounds, to take advantage of Canelo's tendency to start slowly? Throughout his career, it seems that Canelo can fight hard for maybe 6 or 7 rounds out of a 12-round fight. It's just a matter of which 6 or 7 he is going to choose. In the Bivol fight, he chose the earlier rounds. He wanted to establish himself, and he didn't have quite as much in the tank for the later rounds of that fight, and he lost comprehensively. Most of the time during his reign at 168 pounds, and maybe before that, he would take it easy in the first 6 rounds, and then he would start up in round 7 to 12, and then he would really accelerate and pull away and sometimes score knockouts.
But when he didn't in fights like with Trout, it was very close.
Yeah.
Certainly Lara, many people thought Lara won the fight.
Yeah.
And then even the Cotto fight, there were times it was back and forth and close. And Caleb Plant, I think he lasted as long as he did because Canelo took his foot off the accelerator and waited. Probably Kovalev as well. Kovalev was ahead at times. in that fight. So you're right. You bring up a great point. It seems like Canelo doesn't have the ability to fight for 12 rounds hard.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is. I mean, from all intents and purposes, Canelo does train hard. He's a dedicated trainer, and in fact, he said after the fight that his knees were kind of dodgy for the last 4 years, but for the first time in those 4 years, he was able to do road work, which would tell me that if he was able to do road work before this fight, he would have more stamina, not less.
Well, you would think that, but stamina, as you and I were talking about before the broadcast, is a God-given thing. Now, if you don't run or you don't do things properly, or if you don't keep your weight down, whatever, there you absolutely can improve your stamina, no doubt. But great stamina like, I don't know who, a Joe Calzaghe stamina, is you're born with it. And Canelo's never had it. You know, like Floyd Mayweather could fight for 175 rounds. I've never seen Floyd decline at all. He just has that ability, and there are many other fighters, not as many today, but certainly tons from the past. Canelo Alvarez is not one of them. In fact, I think, Gennady has better stamina than does Canelo. So it's an interesting point, something he's gotten away with. But and when we get to this, and maybe we're right there at it, he's not going to get away with it in the future with the guys that are lined up ahead of him, for his future, especially those killer bees we'll talk about, Bivol, Benavidez, Beterbiev. It ain't going to work. He's going to have more in the gas tank, or fight more consistently. But anyway, I'll let you finish your analysis and then talk about where both fighters go from here.
As far as the analysis is concerned, really, Triple G had the opportunity to start fast. I remember before the fight, I said, he's got to jump on Canelo. He's got to get off to an early lead, establish momentum. And when I saw that Golovkin had thrown just 36 punches to Canelo's 33, and when it looked like he wanted to box him instead of push the pace and push Canelo hard, I said after 3 rounds, this fight is essentially over, because it's very difficult if you start slow, you're going to continue to fight slowly. And neither man got out of Golovkin didn't get out of first gear until round 9. And Canelo already by that time had an 8-0 lead. All he had to do was finish the fight on his feet. And really, Golovkin got the kind of fight that he wanted. He wanted a long-range boxing match in which jabs were more prevalent than power shots. Now, Golovkin always threw more jabs than power shots, but here in this third fight, Canelo threw 270 jabs and 217 power shots. And apparently he did that despite coming into the fight with an injured left wrist. He revealed after the fight that for the Bivol fight and for this fight, he had fought with compromised cartilage in his left wrist, and he fought with pain. He said that he originally suffered the injury during the Caleb Plant fight, and he just sucked it up. And that might explain partially what happened against Bivol, might explain partially what happened with Triple G, but it was his left wrist that was hurt, and yet he threw more jabs than power shots. So he used the left hand more than the right hand.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, he said that he is going to undergo surgery, and then he's going to undergo 12 weeks of rehab. And while it's possible that he could come back in May, as we typically think he's going to come back in May, he may hold out until September if he has any setbacks. And if that happens, then one of two things I think is going to happen. He could either be declared a champion in recess, which gives him the right to recuperate, and then once he's well again, he can challenge for any of his old belts. Or the belts will be split up. He will be no longer undisputed champion. David Benavidez, who is the interim champion in the WBC, would be declared the full champion. And then the other organizations would have their would have their tournaments, number one versus number two or whatever, and fill those vacancies. Now, if Canelo does come back in May, his most logical opponent is Benavidez, because that would unite two of the WBC belts. But when a reporter brought up Benavidez's name, Canelo made it pretty clear he wants no part of him because he doesn't want to fight other Mexicans. He said, quote, "When I say I don't want to fight Mexicans, it's because I represent Mexico." And then he talked about how Benavidez's dad talked a lot of stuff. And he said, what did David Benavidez accomplish? Nothing. Now, you could say a lot of things about David Benavidez, but you cannot say that he did not accomplish anything. First, he's undefeated. He is a two-time titleist at 168 pounds. He's undefeated. He's taller. He's got height, reach, work rate. He's got power. All of these things present a huge threat to Canelo. And that's the real reason I think he wants no part of Benavidez. Deep down, he knows that if he fights Benavidez, there is a chance he will lose.
Yeah, well, I actually, and, you know, we're not going to have time to go into all of these opponents, but I think right now, Benavidez beats him, Bivol beats him again, and Beterbiev stops him. So I think Canelo is extremely vulnerable. And I think even with fighters like, you know, Charlo, the bigger Charlo, Jamal, and I think even a guy like Boo Boo, Andrade, I think all of those guys, I would make the favorite over him right now. I think it's just, and Zurdo, I forgot about Zurdo.
He's fighting Bivol next, and it's no guarantee.
And so all of those guys, I think all of a sudden, you know, the invincibility that hung over there with Canelo is completely gone. Bivol got rid of that. And now I think that he's extremely vulnerable. You know, I said that Father Time has been in Gennady's house, hanging out with him, walking around with him for even before the first fight with Canelo in 2017. But Father Time has now entered the redhead's house, and he's getting quite comfortable. He's actually starting to sit down and relax and watch TV with Canelo. I guarantee you this. There is no way that Canelo will have the sustained kind of career that Gennady had. He will not be fighting in 8 years from now when he is 40. So it really speaks to where Gennady Golovkin is, and his guile, his craft, his physicality. Let's just talk because we're coming up on a break, but before we get to it, Gennady Golovkin, in my eyes, of course he can fight and still fight on, and he could beat people. But just because you can fight on doesn't mean you should fight on. He has all the money that anybody could ever need. He is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Easy. He's one of the great middleweight champions of all time in my eyes. And so 2 quick questions, 3 actually. Where does this trilogy rank in terms of the great, let's call it middleweight championship trilogies? Where does Gennady rank in terms of the all-time great middleweights, which I have him in the top 10? And the first question that I want you to get rid of is just quickly is, what do you think personally he should do? For me, it's a no-brainer. Quit.
Well, you know, Triple G has several options.
I'll say retire, not because fighters don't like quit.
Yeah,
retire.
Retire is one of them. He's 40 years old and he has nothing left to prove. But if he continues to fight, he's got several options. One is the WBA. They've ordered him to consolidate their titles against Arislandi Lara, who is the secondary champion, as part of the deal that in which the WBA gave its blessing for Golovkin to challenge Canelo. He had to let them know one way or the other very quickly whether he was going to go back down to 160 and fight Lara. And so if he doesn't vacate the WBA title, he has to fight Arislandi Lara. His mandatory in the IBF is Brazil's Esquivia Falcao. But his most intriguing fights are unification bouts against WBC champion Jamal Charlo or Kazakh countryman Janibek Alimhanoglu, who is the WBO champion. So he's got a lot of decisions to make, and none of the fights that are easy fights. I don't see him winning many of them, if not any of them. Now, as far as the middleweight trilogies, we've had several great middleweight trilogies. The gold standard, I think, is Tony Zale versus Rocky Graziano. Two of those, the first two fights were fights of the year in 1946 and 1947. Another great trilogy was Nino Benvenuti versus Emil Griffith. Their second meeting in 1967, in which Griffith regained the title, was Ring Magazine's 1967 Fight of the Year. Another notable trilogy was Dick Tiger versus Gene Fulmer. They had 3 world title fights staged within 10 months of one another. Tiger won the first on a decision. They had a 15-round draw in Las Vegas in the rematch. And then they went to Africa, Nigeria, Tiger's home country, for the third fight. And Tiger scored a 7th-round TKO to end Gene Fulmer's career. I think that the Triple G Canelo trilogy is going to be right below those 3. A couple of others that might rank above or below Triple G and Canelo, Rodrigo Valdez and Benny Briscoe. They fought 3 times, a non-title 12-round decision the first time around, and then the last 2 fights were for the vacant championship. 7th-round knockout for Valdez in the second fight, 15-round decision for the undisputed title in their third fight, and then finally Bernard Hopkins versus Robert Allen. And this was a pretty salty trilogy. The first fight ended in a 4-round no contest when Hopkins was accidentally pushed out of the ring and he couldn't continue the fight. That led to a second fight a little more than 5 months later. Hopkins scored a dominant 7th-round TKO. And then more than 5 years later, they had their third fight and Hopkins scored a dominant decision. So there's the middleweight trilogies.
And where do you rank Gennady in terms of the great middleweight champions of all time? I definitely have him in the top 10, probably somewhere after, 5 and 6, somewhere 7, 8, 9, 10. Haven't really sat down and put it, but definitely I have him in the top 10.
Yeah, I do as well, and I agree with your placing of him. I think he's somewhere in the bottom half of the top 10. I think that the upper half would include guys like Sugar Ray Robinson, Harry Greb, Carlos Monzon, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Bernard Hopkins. Hopkins, because he was champion for 10 years and he had 20 title defenses. That is longevity and dominance over his era. I think that Golovkin belongs in the neighborhood, say, of a Tony Zale, a Stanley Ketchel, Freddie Steele, Dick Tiger, Emil Griffith, Gene Fulmer, those guys. That's a pretty good neighborhood. And if you want to go with title defenses and length of reign, Arthur Abraham had 10 title defenses, and Felix Sturm had 4 different reigns as middleweight champion. He had 13.
But those 2 aren't in that mix.
They're not really in that mix.
No.
But if you go for that kind of stuff,
yeah.
But yeah, Golovkin was dominant, 23 consecutive knockouts. He had 16 widely recognized defenses, which is right behind Bernard Hopkins and ahead of Carlos Monzon. He's accomplished a lot.
And even the other night, Saturday night, although he lost, to me, and I think to you, and to many, and to maybe most, their trilogy should have been 2 wins for Gennady Golovkin, 1 win this Saturday night against a 40-year-old Gennady Golovkin.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, if you want to know, just for the heck of it, my number 1 middleweight of all time, I will tell you that one. Mine is Carlos Monzon. Who's yours?
I would say with records, I think Harry Greb was the greatest middleweight of all time. So many Hall of Famers he defeated. He didn't have as many title defenses or whatever, but he was the world's best middleweight long before he defeated Johnny Wilson for the actual championship.
Certainly was a great one. It's just too damn bad we can't do the eye test much on him, right? Boy,
That's
we'd
correct.
love to. My eye test used to be what I would hear from my friend Hank Kaplan. And now you're young, Hank. Anyway, we'll take a little break and come back, and we've got some previews to do, and we'll do that on In This Corner of the Podcast, Season 2, Episode 23. Back with more after this. On In This Corner of the Podcast with boxing writer and historian extraordinaire Lee Groves. Lee, we've got some previews to do, and we even have one preview of a preview because we're not going to get a chance to see, we'll get a chance to see Shakur Stevenson in action, but by the time this show airs, we tape on Tuesday, it'll air on Saturday. His fight is on Friday, but he's definitely a fighter worth mentioning.
Yeah, Shakur Stevenson is defending his title against Robson Conceição. And you're right, by the time you see this, the fight will have already taken place. But Shakur Stevenson is a 20 to 30 to 1 favorite to defeat Conceição. I think the odds are a little bit long there. I think Conceição is a little better fighter than that. But Joe Tessitore said a few weeks ago that he believes that Shakur Stevenson will eventually be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. And as we're sitting here on Tuesday, my pick is Stevenson on points. He may even score a later round TKO if he's particularly dominant. Assuming that has happened, let's discuss his future. Now, if Stevenson chooses to stay at 130 pounds, and there's some doubt about that, he's been itching to go up to 135. His goal, I think, will be to become undisputed. And to do that, he'll have to defeat IBF titleist Joe Cordina and WBA counterpart Hector Luis Garcia, neither of whom are aligned with Stevenson's promoter Top Rank. Now, if Stevenson wants to pursue history and win a championship in a third weight class, he should probably go up there. And once he goes up to 135, I think we're going to finally see where Stevenson fits into his generation of peers, because there are a lot of really good fighters up at 135 pounds.
And he is a guy that the sky, even beyond the sky, the planets that, are perhaps there's no limits for him. He just seems to have it all: offense, defense. But you're right. I want to see him in some competitive stuff. And I think for that to take place, he's probably going to have to move up in weight. So from there, we'll go to a real preview of a heavyweight fight that I think is going to be very interesting with Joe Joyce and Joseph Parker. Parker's already won a belt. Joyce is a young contender at 37. So it's an interesting fight and story, especially when you think about Joe Joyce and his age and everything, and you're going to explain.
Yeah, but before I go into that, I'm going to talk about the co-feature of this card, and that features one of the best pound for pound fighters on earth in Amanda Serrano.
Right.
She lost to Katie Taylor earlier this year, but that was at 135 pounds. Now she drops down to 126 to defend her WBC WBO belts against IBF counterpart Sarah Mahfoud. Now it's interesting that Serrano is going to be fighting in the UK, because should she pursue a rematch with Katie Taylor, that fight will definitely be in the UK, because Taylor won the first fight in Serrano's backyard.
Has there been any talk of a rematch? I haven't heard any, Lee.
I heard that Serrano was offered an immediate rematch, but she turned it down. So I'm not entirely sure about that. Maybe she wanted to get in a few more fights before taking on that big challenge again. And one of those challenges is to become a three to hold three of the belts at 126. I think that this fight will serve as a dress rehearsal for fighting in the UK. And Mahfoud, a little bit about her. She's a native of the Faroe Islands, which is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. She's undefeated. She's 11-0 with 3 knockouts. And I counted Mahfoud's fight with Brenda Carabajal, in which she won the interim title in February 2020. It was a lopsided 10-round decision. And although she impressed me with her work rate, Carabajal is nowhere near Serrano's level, and Mahfoud will be fighting outside Denmark for the first time in her pro career. It's been 18 months since Serrano has scored a knockout win, but I believe that we will see her do it here. And if she does do it, she gets to 31 knockouts in her career, which is just one behind Christy Martin's all-time record of 32.
Interesting. All right, now to the big guys.
Yeah. Well, just like Dick Clark, the longtime host of American Bandstand, he was often described as the world's oldest teenager because of his youthful looks.
I thought I was the world's oldest teenager, but go ahead.
Well, maybe now you are, since he's passed. But at age 37, Joe Joyce may be one of the oldest fighters ever to be perceived as an up-and-comer. But he is. He's ranked number 1 in the WBO thanks to his record of 14-0, 13 knockouts. And later today, he'll be fighting the WBO's number 2 contender, Joe Joyce, former WBO champion. He is by far the best opponent of Joyce's pro career. Now, this is a very interesting clash of styles. Parker is a skilled all-around boxer who has far superior experience at world level, while Joyce's nickname of the Juggernaut fits him perfectly. He's a big, strong volume puncher. He's got a thumping telephone pole jab, and he's got heavy hands. Now, does that sound like some other heavyweight of the past? He reminds me of George Foreman, who branded himself as a prospect when he returned to the sport in 1987 after 10 years away. He said at the time he wanted to treat himself like a young prospect. And over the first 4 years of his comeback, he fought anybody and everybody. And by the time he fought Evander Holyfield in 1991, he was 24-0 with 23 knockouts in his comeback. And so Joyce has that same thick body and that same telephone pole jab as Big George did. And even though he gets hit flush with some power shots every so often, his chin has held up very well so far. And because neither guy is a defensive wizard, I think we'll see plenty of bombs thrown and landed. And if that happens, I favor the bigger, stronger Joyce to win by a later round TKO.
Yeah, perhaps he can get Parker off of his feet. A few times Parker's experience might play out. I see the analogy, and I like it to Big George, although Joyce is not even on the radar when it comes to the punching power that
right.
George Foreman had. But it's interesting. And although we talk about guys like Triple G being over the hill, way past his prime at 40, and guys like Canelo who started fighting when he was like age 6, and he's probably over the hill at 32, or not over the hill, but past his prime. Heavyweights are the guys that can fight on.
Yeah.
You mentioned George Foreman. It seems, if I'm correct, that he won a heavyweight title from a guy named Michael Moore at age 45. So Joyce can do it. Parker is longer in the tooth, but does have that experience. And so your pick on the fight is Joyce by decision?
Joyce by later round TKO. I think he's going to wear him down.
Okay. And there'll be a lot of good stuff for him to if probably be the last fight of the year for him, and that'll put him way up. And what's next for him could be some stuff that we're going to talk about after the break. And I got to tell you something, recently on the show, we've been talking about fights that need to be made. And I always say, if the fighters want the fights, then they can be made. Well, it appears as though Fury and AJ, and more importantly for me and this audience probably, Crawford and Spence. It seems as though everybody, all of the above fighters mentioned, want the fight. And we'll talk about that and the rest of what is we say this, I hear too many commentators, a stacked lineup. Well, the rest of 2022 in boxing is a stacked lineup. And we'll talk about that stack right after this.
I want people to call me champ. I want everyone to respect me. I want to go down in history as the greatest ever. So I'll perfect my technique. I'll throw harder than anyone I face. Every day I'll make my hands faster. I'll increase my endurance. I'll get all of this by being the first to the gym and the last to leave. I'll work endlessly to make sure what I want today is mine tomorrow. Because I'm gearing up for greatness.
Back on In This Corner for the final segment of this show, and the final segment of 2022 is going to be I think some scintillating boxing action. We don't know about all of the dates of all of the fights, but I'll just toss to you. Take us through what should be a phenomenal final quarter of boxing in 2022.
It really is. And as you mentioned at the end of last segment, it appears that two of the biggest fights that can be made took huge steps toward actually being made, as the teams handling the careers of Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, as well as those guiding Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, have agreed to terms. And now the terms are in the hands of the lawyers. They're handling the final details, and no announcements have been made yet. But news of progress is something to be taken note of. It appears that Crawford Spence, tentative date November 19th, tentative place Las Vegas, and Fury Joshua is scheduled for December 3rd in Cardiff, Wales, Millennium Stadium. So if that happens, that's, for weeks we have been railing against Crawford and Spence for taking too long to make a deal. And apparently they heard us, they heard Twitter, they heard all the reporters, they heard everybody saying, make the fight. And apparently they're doing their best to make that fight come together. And as for Fury Joshua, that fight has come together with incredible speed, which should prove beyond doubt that when the fighters want a fight to happen, the fight usually happens. They work for the fighters don't work for them. And should these fights come to fruition, you're right, the final quarter of 2022 looks absolutely stupendous.
And take us through, the fights that are either signed or look like they're going to be. I mean, it all starts in just a few weeks.
One fight involves a guy that you're going to be working with in Regis Prograis, who is scheduled to fight Jose Zepeda for the vacant WBC title at 140. Now, we don't have a date or a site yet, but it's been mandated to happen. And so finally, maybe our three-time guest, Regis Prograis, is finally going to get that chance to regain the world title he lost against Josh Taylor.
And I'll be working with him October the 6th in Houston, and hopefully by then, he will have the date on that. But keep going.
So the extravaganza really begins on October 8th. Sebastian Fundora is going to be defending his WBC interim title at 154 against Carlos Ocampo, who has won 12 straight fights since his one-round KO loss to Errol Spence. On the undercard is an intriguing rematch between Fernando Martinez and Jerwin Nkajas for the IBF Super Flyweight title. Martinez fulfilled his father's dying wish in beating Encajas to become the champion. But the fight was so good and so action-packed that they arranged for an immediate rematch. And in beating Encajas, Martinez ended the second longest reign in men's boxing. It was over 5 years as champion. And then on the same day, you have the son of Nigel Benn, Conor Benn, fighting the son of Chris Eubank Jr., at 157-pound catch weight. Very intriguing fight indeed, and a big fight in the UK. Then we go to October 15th. You have the showdown between former WBC heavyweight champion Deontay Wilder and Robert Helenius, who is coming off back-to-back KO defeats of Adam Kovnatsky. This is a showdown between two of the biggest punchers in the heavyweight division, and in Wilder's case, one of the biggest shot-for-shot hitters in the history of heavyweight boxing. On the undercard is Caleb Plant versus Anthony Durrell. And this is a crossroads fight between a former champion in Plant, coming off the TKO loss against Canelo last November, and the former two-time WBC super middleweight titleist in Durrell. And then on the same day, you have the women's supercard, headed by Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall, and Michaela Mayer and Alicia Baumgardner. That fight card was scheduled for September 10th, but the death of Queen Elizabeth II pushed it back to October 15th. And I
saw today, before we went to air, I saw confirmation that it will be October the 15th.
All right.
So that's good. That's good news there. Hold it for just a second, just really quickly.
Sure.
Of course, Ben and Eubank, their daddies fought, I think, twice. I think
yes.
with I think Eubank got the stoppage, and I think the second fight might have been a draw.
It was a draw.
And
many people thought Ben should have won that fight, including me.
And well, what about with the kids, the offspring? Who do you just, you don't have to break it down, but what's your thought? Who do you think comes out on top?
It depends on how well Eubank goes and makes the catch weight. Ben can he's a welterweight coming up. He's shown good power. He's the younger and fresher, but Eubank is much more experienced, the best opponent of Ben's career.
Who do you lean towards right now?
I am, because he is fresher. He is more dynamic. Eubank fights a lot like his dad. He takes his time. He is a craftsman.
So you're leaning towards Ben.
I'm leaning toward Ben in that fight.
Wilder, Helenius. Who are you? An upset. Wilder, conventional wisdom, but if he doesn't get it done in the first few rounds, I think there could be an upset.
There could be. Helenius is a very dangerous puncher. Deontay, I right now favor Wilder in a wild fight. He's got that thunder, and that could strike at any time. So you got to respect that, and I do.
And quickly, I don't think Durrell is a pushover for Plant.
He's not. The only thing about Durrell is that he is getting up there in age, and he has problems with cuts around the eyes. And Caleb Plant is a good long-range boxer. He knows what he does well. He sticks with it. I favor Caleb Plant on points right now, but I do respect Durrell's power. He really has a much bigger punch than Caleb Plant does.
So then we go to a rematch in Down Under that's coming up.
Yeah, on October 16th in Australia, October 15th in the United States, Devin Haney is going to defend his undisputed lightweight championship against George Kambosos. Now, this was a mandated rematch of their first fight on June 5th, in which Haney won a lopsided decision to become undisputed champion. And like the first fight, it will take place in Melbourne. But while June's fight was staged in a 40,000-seat cricket ground, Marvel Stadium, the rematch will be at Rod Laver Arena, whose capacity is only 15,000. But as far as the fight is concerned, Kambosos couldn't have fought much worse. Haney couldn't have fought much better. I think it's going to be a better fight, but I still think Haney's going to win on points. What about you, Smitty?
Yeah, well, I learned my lesson in not looking at enough film the last time of it, because you had said to me, you asked me about watching film, and I said I thought I had seen enough of of Kambosos, but I obviously didn't, and I can't see Haney losing the rematch, but I think it will be a much better fight for him. There's a name, Rod Laver. I loved Rod Laver. What a great player he was. All right. Speaking of greats, there's a guy named Lomachenko who will be back in action.
Yeah, Lomachenko's returning to the ring for the first time in 10 months against Ortiz, who is coming off the biggest win of his career against former 130-pound champion Jamel Herring. I really like this fight. Lomachenko, he is helped with the cause with Ukraine and the Russian invasion and everything. Now he's back into the ring to show his brilliance. I think that brilliance will be enough to take care of Jermaine Ortiz, who is on a nice roll, by the way, by beating Jamel Herring. And then on the same day,
let's hold on Lomachenko. Should he win?
Yeah.
And should Haney win? And of course, there's so many other guys around there. There's Tank and Ryan Garcia. Wouldn't a great matchup? Maybe it wouldn't be the fistic fireworks that we'd like because they're both great boxers. But man, matching the young great Haney against the older brilliant Lomachenko, what a highly skilled pugilistic chess match that would be. Almost a pick'em fight. I would lean towards Lomachenko because I'm older. I like the experienced guy, but what a great fight.
It is a great fight.
And I think it could be made. I think that fight can be made sooner than later because of the attitudes of Haney, who's really shown what he's all about going to Australia. Even after convincingly he goes back, no problems, and he'll take on anybody, and we know Loma will.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Lomachenko is a predatory scientist. Devin Haney is a defensive scientist. That may be the difference in the fight. But I really haven't assessed it. It is truly a pick'em fight because Lomachenko is getting older. Haney is one of the youngest champions in boxing. He knows what he does well. I think it'll be a fascinating style matchup. It really is. And then on the other side of the coin, you have a Showtime pay-per-view fight between Jake Paul and Anderson Silva. And Paul is returning after scheduled fights with Tommy Fury and Hassim Rahman Jr. fell through. He will now fight a 47-year-old MMA legend in Silva, who is coming off back-to-back wins against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and fellow MMA legend Tito Ortiz. Given the fighting experience of Anderson Silva and the fact that he's had 3 professional fights in the boxing ring, it does qualify as a step up for Jake Paul because he is fighting someone who has fought professionally, but he's 47 years old, stacking the deck a little bit.
Yeah, I automatically scratched my head when we started talking about this one, and the fact that a step-up guy is a 47-year-old guy who's only had a few professional fights against Ortiz, and then the ultimate underachiever of all time, that is Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. But I'm certain it'll be, well, I guess we'll have time to, since we love Showtime here on In This Corner, we'll have time to talk about it. And I guess there's a couple of other fights that to talk about to end the year.
Yeah, on November 1st, we have a very fascinating junior flyweight unification match between Kenshiro Teraji and Hiroto Kiyoguchi. Now, this is a fight that's been 4 years in the making, and this pits 2 of the best 108-pounders in the world. Teraji is the 2-time WBC champion, while Kiyoguchi is the WBA's super champion at 108. Now, this is a huge fight in the Pacific Rim. And what adds to the fascination is that the winner of this fight may well fight WBO counterpart Jonathan Gonzalez, who will defend his belt against number 2 contender Shokichi Iwata on the undercard of this fight. So you could have the 2 winners fighting for 3 108-pound belts. And then Junto Nakatani is also going to be on the card, one of the great young champions in boxing. Then on November 5th, we have one of the best matches that could be made at 175 pounds. You have Dimitri Bivol coming off the big win over Canelo Alvarez, fighting Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez. he is fine. You know, he is the boogeyman of the division. He's finally getting a chance to fight for a major world title. And this is a true 50-50 fight. I don't know who to pick right now because the contrasts are so stunning and each guy does what he does well, so well. And on the undercard, Jessica McCaskill, the undisputed women's welterweight champion, is actually moving down in weight to 140 to challenge Chantel Cameron for Cameron's 2 belts at 140 pounds. Now, theoretically, McCaskill's 147-pound belt should also be on the line because both fighters will be weighing in under 147. But apparently, Jessica McCaskill is moving down temporarily, winning those belts, and then moving back up to 147. At least that's the plan. And then the year ends, at least as far as what we know so far, maybe the best fight of them all. Juan Francisco Estrada, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez for the 3rd time. Their first 2 fights were sensational. The 3rd fight may well be the capper to one of the great trilogies of all time.
And who do you lean towards in their 3rd fight?
I lean toward Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. You can make a strong argument that he won the rematch, but was denied the decision. I don't think Juan Francisco Estrada looked particularly great in his last fight. He was pushed hard in his last fight. Chocolatito looked brilliant, continues to look brilliant. We thought that he was all done after he got knocked out by Sir Rungvisai, but since then he's been golden. He is the golden Chocolatito, the golden standard, right?
Yeah, he is. We thought he was all done years ago, and he proved he had a lot more. Canelo might have a faded gas tank, but apparently Chocolatito has more left in him, and we'll see what he has in this 3rd match with Estrada. That one again slated for December the 3rd, and we don't know if there's anything booked beyond that. But boy, that makes for a Merry Christmas for boxing fans. Just the lineup that we just mentioned to you, and we'll get a chance to talk about all of that. You mentioned we'll get Zerto on the show coming up and talk about that big fight with Bivol. Just so much intrigue. I'm glad we're getting these fights, and let's especially hope that maybe by the time we go to air next week that we'll have confirmation on Crawford and Spence and Fury and AJ, especially Crawford and Spence. Thanks, Lee Groves. Great job as always.
Thank you, Smitty. And great job for you as well.
So long, everybody.